Hello everyone. In this video I wanted to go over my thinking process while making these sketches, and a design principle I like to use is something I used during the teaching, and I hoped my students found it helpful as well, is a certain word, and the word basically stands for different things you can think about while designing your sketches. So the word is FPODSS. And each letter stands for a certain principle that you should keep in mind while designing your sketches. So the first one is functionality. Let me write it down really quickly. I'll put it somewhere, maybe a different layer. Yeah, and also for these videos, like what I really like is designing and drawing, obviously, but also just talking about it and sharing the things I know. But I don't have a lot of time doing these, so don't expect fancy intros or edits. It's just raw footage, I guess. So first one is functionality. Voila. Let me write them down first. And proportions. So we have functionality, proportions, overlap, dynamism, and I'll explain all of them in a second here. Silhouette, and then finally shading. So those are the important ones, and this is something I keep or try to keep in mind while designing. You will see this happening with good designers as well. You will see that in their designs, and sometimes, like in this case, sometimes it's in there, sometimes it's not, which is normal because you have so much to think about while making these sketches. And sometimes you're tired, right? So you're just doodling a little bit, but then it's definitely helpful to keep this in mind, like if you go back to them. And that's basically what I'm going to do in this video right now, is I'll have a look at these sketches and see if I can improve them using the FPODSS. Okay, so let me get rid of this first so we can start. Functionality is all about understanding, or more about, can the viewer understand what this sketch is and means. So in this case, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with these designs. I wasn't sure if it, like I kind of knew I wanted to make some kind of sci-fi spaceships, I guess, and just having that as a goal, I guess. You kind of know that for one you need, let's see, a cockpit, right? There has to be some kind of area where someone or more persons can sit. Maybe wings, depending on if it can land like on the surface, or like in a world where you have air, etc., where wings are necessary. Engines. What else? Landing gear, and it can be like wheels, legs. It can even maybe attach to something so it doesn't really land on the ground, it just stays afloat. What else? You can have communications, ladders, right? I'm putting these a little bit smaller because it's maybe less important, but it's things that you can kind of link to the vehicle on its own, and probably there's a little bit more, right? But I think like these are the most important ones. And if you cannot recognize these elements on your designs, be it a silhouette design, a rough sketch, whatever media you're using to translate or to showcase your idea, if people cannot see these things in it, they won't have any idea what they're looking at, right? And this is also something you have to realize for yourself. If you try to make these kind of sketches, for example, from a photo, like photo bashing it, or drawing, just making, let's give you a quick idea. Let's say you make a silhouette of something. Let's do it like this. Right. Some people will see a shape in it, and they might think it's a weapon, or it's a vehicle, or it's a balloon, or whatever. And some people will look at it and don't see anything in it. That basically means that your visual library, and it's a whole topic for maybe another video one time, but it means that your visual library is not strong enough. And what I mean with that, like if you don't know how a cockpit looks like, if you don't know how wings function or look like, engines, landing gear, etc., you cannot see these things in there, right? If you have a look at our example, there's like this round shape. This, like looking at the shape, looking at the textures, it kind of reminds me of those old World War II airplanes, those bombers, where you have these small cockpits on the wings or at the backside of the vehicle, of the airplane, where there was like a person, like a gunner, right, sitting there. And you, like this round shape kind of reminds me of that. So in this sketch, in this silhouette, I could say maybe this is the cockpit, right? Maybe this is a large wing that sits here. Or maybe it's a tank for the fuel, right? That's another thing that we can add here, like fuel tank. Probably need something like that as well. But maybe it's a wing, maybe it's part of fuel tank. Maybe this is the wing, like the rudder, right? Maybe this is the rudder, and this is the direction. This is the direction that the vehicle would take. And then maybe this is not the main cockpit, maybe it's like a gunner cockpit, and maybe this is the cockpit. So there's like a cockpit here in the front, right? So having a strong visual library, having knowledge about all these things will make designing a lot easier, right? So if you have the feeling that you're struggling with making sketches, like everyone can place shapes on a piece of paper, right? Everyone can do something like this, but not everyone will see something in it, right? So if you don't have the feeling you see something in it, you have to build your visual library. How you can build it is basically looking up references, real life references of cockpits, wings, fuel, whatever, fuel tanks, engines, and sketch them. And while sketching them, you will kind of build that visual library, right? So this is basically the first thing you have to do. So that's functionality, right? Proportions is all about having an interesting feeling, readability in your shapes. What I mean with that is that proportions is all about big, medium, small. So we can have 3 shapes here. If you look at those, you will notice that they're similar, right? They have the same size. It's not really interesting. We don't really know which one to focus on. By making one bigger and one a little bit smaller and even smaller, we get a visual or a pleasing, how can I say it? Like a pleasing hierarchy between the two or the 3, right? So one is obviously smaller, one is bigger, so there's more focus on the bigger one. You can even take it further and think about texture, right? We can give this a different texture. We can make this rounder, so this is straight, this is round, and then this is small. So we have different tricks, right, to put focus on a certain shape. And in our design, what we want to, excuse me, what we want to avoid is where shapes or vehicles, like we have the main shape, but in there, like, so we have the large shape, but in there we have also medium shapes and smaller shapes. And we want to avoid that shapes tend to go with similar proportions. So clearly I have this hull, and then I have these engines, or wings, but I imagine them as being engines. And they kind of like, this line divides, because why do we put this line here? Because I clearly go from a different kind of texture, different kind of shape, right? So I make like a jump here. So this kind of divides our design in like a 50-50 kind of ratio, which is not as interesting as, for example, a longer design. Let me give that a try really quickly so you can see what I mean. Yeah, okay. So we can detach this. Let's say that we make this a little bit longer. We can use the clone stamp tool to kind of clone this area. Could do something like this. And as a shape, that can be more interesting, but at the same time, you have to think about, okay, what could this be, right? So we're kind of combining functionality as well. Or you can take it step by step, of course. Let's put this here. Voilà. So what we get right now is more of this 80-20, or oftentimes, like some artists, like in general, you could also say 70-30. Like, it's not like, you definitely don't start measuring it, of course, but it's the feeling that you get, right? This is obviously smaller and this is bigger, right? Same thing can go here. For example, if you look at this design, we have this vertical shape going up, and then we have this other shape going downwards. If you look at it, this is very similar, right? So that's definitely something. If I would take this design, maybe I'll do that a little bit later, I would definitely start changing that as well. So this is all about proportions. Excuse me. Let me take something to drink here. I just woke up and decided I wanted to make this video, so and didn't really drink too much yet. Never mind. So number 3 is overlap. Let's see. Let me just merge these. So overlap is basically a way to create a little bit more depth in your sketches. It depends on what type of sketching you're doing. If it's a silhouette, then it's of course harder to show that overlap, right? You have to rely on shading afterwards. But overlap is simple. It's about having shapes in front of other shapes, right? Not everything, like with these wings or engines, not everything has to be behind each other, right? So a cockpit can be a little bit inset. Wings or engines can be on top of the vehicle, right? So think about that as well. And the best way to show that, I think in most cases, is when you have a side view, is to start thinking about a top view as well. So you can have the center line, like in this case, I had this shape for the cockpit, which kind of slides backwards. But it could even be that there's like 2 of them. Maybe there's 2 cockpits here sitting on the side, and there's like 2 ladders. So this is the ladder, 2 ladders going down. And then I have this kind of fish shape, maybe this a little bit wider. So it goes like this, right? And then I have this engine, which sits on the side here. And then I have like the tail shape. It could be 2 again, it could be 1, it could be 5, it could be 3, right? So that's those things that you can, let's make 2. No, it's those things you can start designing in the top view. And this is just one idea, like one possible iteration. Like right now we said that the cockpit is here, like you have 2 cockpits. It can even be that the cockpit is in the middle. Like if you make an iteration on this, could even be that, like right now the design line goes like this. Could even be that maybe it's thicker in the front and then it goes like that, or it is thicker in the back and it goes like this to the front, right? So it's not because you have the side view that the top view is already decided, right? You have so many options still. Okay, let's put that here. No. bear with me here. Okay. And then we have dynamism. Dynamism is all about having interesting lines, a certain stance in it, right? Most of the time, what we want to avoid is having straight horizontal lines or vertical lines, right? Especially, I think in vehicle design, we want to have like a certain stance to, or you want to give your vehicle a certain stance, a certain direction. And that's something you would notice, for example, if you would imagine a Formula One car that has this sleek aerodynamic shape to it, right? So it is clearly a design line going downwards. Same thing with sports cars, etc. Versus, for example, a truck. Let me draw a very simple truck here, which is basically a block. If I'm being disrespectful to trucks, it's basically a block, right? Driving around. So what you want to do in your designs next time, if you make your sketches, think about, okay, maybe I have to rotate a certain shape a little bit. Like the same thing here. If I look at it, this is very horizontal, which gives more of a calming feeling to the design. But maybe your design brief asks for a fast, slick vehicle, right? So then what you want to do is maybe put it in a certain stance, pinch it a little bit. Of course, we don't want to make the cockpit too small, right? So we definitely want to design it a little bit more. But okay, we want to put it in a certain angle. So maybe this is also a little bit more in that design line. And then basically your stance is like that, right? A little bit more sleek. Probably we want to make the cockpit shape a little bit more within. Within the design. So it feels more aerodynamic as well, right? Again, we are in space, so probably it doesn't matter that much, right? We don't need aerodynamic shapes in space, but if we would visit the planet or something, it can have a big impact, or just in general, right? This is what the audience understands. Everyone understands that the shape that looks like this goes faster, or looks faster, at least, than a shape that looks like this, right? Because that's what we know. We know that this is a truck, and we know that this is a sports car, right? So that's dynamism. And it's just something to keep in mind, right? If you have a certain design that you like, and you're not sure if it's the best idea yet, take your shape or take your design, move it around a little bit, take your shapes, put them in certain angles, and see if it works. Right? Same thing here. This feels very flat. I like the line that we have here, so that can be a star. But this is ball, like the front grille, feels very straight, right? Maybe we can, or maybe we can change that in the end as well. And then we have silhouette. Silhouette is also important. Silhouette is purely about the outline, I guess, of the shape. And what we want to avoid is having just a simple shape, let's say like a sphere, and that makes it very hard to understand the whole design. So this is the time where you can start thinking about functionality a little bit more as well, and start thinking about, okay, does my silhouette, does it tell where the cockpit can sit? Does it tell where the engines can sit? Here we have communication, we have the ladders, we have lights, all these things that can fit on a flying vehicle. Can I somehow in my silhouette hint these things, right? Around the cockpit, that's oftentimes where you can find these small antennas, etc. Can we draw these things? Does my silhouette tell or show the different proportions? It can have a big shape, and it can have the smaller shapes around it. And does it have a wing? All these kind of things. And at the same time, you want to make sure that you have interesting negative shapes as well. What are negative shapes is basically the areas where you can look through the design. So if I put like lines here or small dots, I can imagine that these pieces are separated with each other, right? That makes it an interesting silhouette to look at. Silhouette is basically the first thing your mind kind of picks up on. Let's say you have, imagine you're walking down the street and suddenly like it's dark and you're walking in an alley, and suddenly somewhere further you see a person, like it's a dark shape, but it has these kind of ears on his head, right? Everyone knows it's Batman, right? Because it's such an iconic shape, right? So that's something you want to keep in mind as well while you're designing your vehicles, right? Your designs. And then finally we have shading, and shading is all about creating a little bit more volume, making the design itself read a little bit better. Of course, here in this example, we're working with a photo already, so we already have the shading in there. We can paint a little bit on top of it, of course, but it's more about, let's say this is your design, is adding a little bit more volume. So just by adding a little bit of shading, we can make volumes read better, and we can make the whole design a little bit more understandable as well. So we can shade the cockpit a little bit. We can show that this shape, if we see it, for example, from the front or back, that it goes like this. So this underside is a little bit shaded, right? So that's shading. So that's it for the design principles. Maybe one more thing I wanted to mention with these photos is that it's really important. Let me take a quick screenshot here of my shape references. It's really important if you do this exercise with a photo like I did, is maybe keep two things in mind. First of all, you want to take a picture that kind of, like, it's depending on how strong your visual library is. Again, this is just a bottle of mayonnaise, but if you look at it, like, this is the shape, and it can be an interesting shape, but if your visual library is not strong, you won't see a spaceship in there. You won't see a driving car in it. Same thing here. This is an interesting shape, but some people just see a chair. Other people see sci-fi ships in it, right? So depending on how strong your visual library is, you can pull this or these kind of shape references off. But if you're just starting out, I would go for shape references that have a lot of greeble on them, very small technical bits. Like this one, this is already, if we look at it, like let's say this is the back view and the vehicle is going in that direction. This is already a flying vehicle if you look at it, right? We have wings or two rudders in the back, like that. We have two engines. The cockpit can sit here. Maybe this is the cockpit. Maybe the cockpit is at the bottom, right? But this already tells so much, or triggers so much already, a lot more than these kind of images. And so that's one thing. Try to go for a reference image that has greeble in it, right? Technical bits in it, depending on your knowledge already about the subject, right? Like how strong your visual library is. And second, if you want to make side views, sorry, like the ones I did, it's a little bit more practical if you go with an image that has or is portrayed in the side view already, because then you don't have to think about perspective or deforming your shapes. But as you can see, you can also start with a perspective one and then deform the shapes a little bit, or if you don't, like, it kind of looks in perspective slightly, right? So that's another way of thinking about it. Okay, so I'm going to stop this video here. Just save it just in case, and maybe I will make another video where I take a couple of these designs and try to improve them. Think about the functionality a little bit more. Like here I was thinking maybe it would be cool if these were like bombs, and it's like an array of bombs and they can like just drop. Or in this case, what I drew is that this is basically ammunition. It's kind of getting feed into this, whatever weapon this could be. But then you also have to think about, okay, we have this large cockpit, why is it so exposed? If you're like a fighter kind of vehicle, probably you want to have some kind of plating maybe in front of it. That would be cool. Why is it so vertical? Maybe it's a super slow moving vehicle, but it's very strong. So then maybe you want to have like more guns or like a stronger gun in the back, right? Does this thing, can it rotate? What would be the functionality about that? Like, why would it be able to rotate? Maybe it can swivel up and down. Maybe it's a way to land. Maybe there's other boosters here. How do they communicate? How do they land? Right? How do they maybe feed more ammunition in it? Right? So it's all these other questions that we can still ask on these or for these designs. Okay, so I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.